My name is Larry Breen. I'm Chief Commercial Officer at NearForm. Healthcare perpetually has been in the state of evolution. We've seen digital technologies being adopted before COVID's come along. We've seen that sort of transition continue to accelerate and grow, but COVID came along and obviously had a dramatic impact. Healthcare and healthcare systems really needed to focus on dealing with the virus, tackling with the crisis as it was. So as a consequence from that point of view is obviously there was a lot of work done in terms of dealing with that critical care, anything that could be needed to be deferred or delayed, and we've seen obviously the consequence of that in terms of the backlog that sits within the healthcare system. What we've also seen as part of that whole COVID response is, a reluctance for some people to go in with early symptoms. So again, the risk of going in to their practitioner or hospital, in their mind outweighs the benefit of going in for a small ache or pain that normally they'd go and actually see. This will, unfortunately, lead to people not being able to avail of early interventions like they would do normally. So it's kind of anticipated we've got a 5 to 10 year sort of backlog or cycle of catch up that's going to happen as a consequence of it. So downside to COVID is we're going to see that COVID hangover hang on for quite some time. The big thing about COVID is COVID created an environment where everybody had to look at new ways of working. So if we look at how governments, how healthcare providers, how patients themselves actually engage in the whole healthcare service, it changed overnight as a consequence of the pandemic and the pressures that it put upon them. These changes are great. So what it meant is we were able to rethink, and where historically it would take 5 to 10 years of transformation and gradual change, this all became very accelerated. We're fortunate enough in NearForm to be one of the key examples of that, and we were able to work with a number of governments across the globe in terms of working on the whole COVID response. What we saw are governments actually being able to engage, design systems, work with technology providers like NearForm, obviously to build better software, faster, highly secure, privacy preserving, and to achieve all of that in record time. Normally a project of those kind of magnitude would be measured in years, not months and weeks. With COVID, with the responses that were necessary across the board in all walks of life, both in the therapies that were being delivered, and we've seen obviously vaccinations now have come at record speed. So again, where we've seen historically those kind of things taking years, time for decision making, investment decisions, lots of research and development, and then a gradual bring to market. We've seen all of those sort of timelines accelerated and driven forwards. What does that now mean for us? Well, what that means for us as a population, and what it means in terms of when we look at Resurgence, it means that as we come out of COVID, obviously, we do have that COVID hangover that we're going to have to address. And that's not a good thing. But what it also does is it keeps the pressure on to challenge us in terms of how do we deliver healthcare and how do we drive it forward. Well, the obvious answer is the accelerated movement of digital health over that COVID period and the understanding of both the providers, the networks, the governments, the sponsors, the payers, and most importantly, the patients in terms of how they engage with healthcare. We're to take those kind of learnings, to take those understandings that were forced upon us, that we had to adapt to during COVID. Now let's leverage that as we move into a more positive and new future. What are the 5 things that I see that are going to, sort of drive that resurgence within healthcare and really help us get over this backlog faster than we ever anticipated, but also set us up for success going forward? As we all know, we have an ever-aging population. The cost of healthcare is going up. We're expecting to have those longer life outcomes. So, we need to have the treatments that can actually handle it. And we also need to be able to do it in an efficient and budgetary fashion that we can actually afford and maintain and sustain going forwards. We want to get better and more immediate access to care. So things like virtual consultations, online. So, historically we've seen folks use doctor search engine, going and looking up bits and pieces. They don't need to do that anymore. Let's start getting actual professional health providers and systems, whether it's pharmaceutical companies, whether it's public health authorities, whether it's physicians and GPs, allowing them to give instant access to folks in real time as they actually need it. So again, driving earlier and earlier those points of intervention, which typically will drive down the cost of care. All of this needs to be done, number 2, from a patient-centric point of view. We need to look at healthcare pathways. So how does the patient go from that initial inquiry through whatever healthcare path that they need to come out with a positive outcome. So again, it's involving patients by putting tools in their hands. No longer am I going to sit and wait for a brown envelope to land on my doormat to tell me I've got a hospital appointment. I should be able to do it through my app, through my healthcare experience portal, so I can actually see when I'm due to have an appointment. I'm actually able to schedule it, move, change, and adapt to the changing needs of the healthcare providers themselves as they need to adjust their schedules. I want to have access to my information. It's my information, it's about me. I need to be an active participant in this rather than just a passenger. So again, having that information helps me move the whole process forward and support the healthcare providers in terms of better outcomes. Again, obviously it's caveated. We need to make sure that we're careful with the information, because too much information can be, too much for people. It can take them down a different path. It can create stresses and anxiety. So it's about finding that right balance. What we want to be able to do is create access to care, but not just the core clinical care, it's all the support services that go around it. So, if we're looking at a cardiology team, it's not just about what the cardiologists and their associated folks are going to do for us. It's the wider life improvement, health, physiotherapy, dietitians, support groups and networks that can actually help you overcome some of the learnings of dealing with cardiac issues, of changing how you approach your life and how you actually drive forwards. It's helping you connect with other folks within your illness bubble, with people who have similar experiences, people that can help and advise and obviously make the transition through there more efficient and obviously less frightening and more straightforward, help faster recovery times. We need to have that joined up approach. So number 3, we've got the technology out there, we've got those great systems out there, there's a whole bunch of them. What we need to do is obviously make sure that they're integrated. So the systems are actually talking to one another. I, as the patient, have got access to my data, but also as I go in to see the different providers along my journey, they have access to the elements of data that they need to make the best decision for me. So when I have a scan, when I have blood results, when I have a report back from whatever part of the whole patient pathway, that's made available in real time to other folks within that patient pathway and that patient outcome determination, but only those elements that you need to see. Again, it is my data. It is private. We want to make sure that we're not making it public. So again, we just need to make sure that we're identifying how that information actually moves through and getting these different systems to actually talk together. It doesn't mean we have to have one single system. It is about adding more and more and more layers upon it, but making sure we do it in an integrated fashion rather than keeping it in isolation. I myself have seen consultants having to log into multiple different systems and do comparisons and try and gather data points from different systems. Let's pull it together. Let's use the intelligence of technology that we have to actually make that whole journey easier. We also need to look at some of the therapeutic values that we have out there. So some of the things that are directly like medical devices, but also some of the things that people are bringing in from a lifestyle point of view. More and more folks out there have smartphones in their pockets, are starting to use wearables like these kind of things, Apple devices on their arms. Again, they're continuously interacting with me as a person. They're taking regular readings. They have the ability to obviously report on a whole bunch of data in real time, collecting that information without it disrupting my actual life. So it gets a true reflection. For me to go in and have measurements done while I'm actually in a hospital bed or in a hospital environment, that's a false environment by its very nature. So I can have higher anxiety levels. I'm not doing my normal day-to-day routines, etc., etc. Having these things on there, you forget about them, you get on with your normal routines, but all the while they can collect that information. Using that information, again, carefully and wisely, and obviously privacy preserving, obviously can help better clinical outcomes, can make better decisions. So looking at how we leverage medical devices allows us to obviously get more of that information in real time, but it also allows us to obviously move the pathway for care sometimes out of the hospital or clinician's environment and back into our home care environment. So again, from that point of view, driving down costs, driving down the inconvenience, and again, we create more of that virtual clinic environment going on where we're collecting all those kind of data points. Speaking of data, and fifth and final on the list of 5 is we need data decision making. We need to look at data. We need to be able to drive it forward. So as we talk about all these different parts, we're collecting more and more and more information, and that's great. And we've got greater tools and abilities to collect all of this. From a physician's point of view, they need as many data points as they can to make those kind of informed decisions. But what we don't want to do is to turn them into data scientists and folks that are sat in front of a keyboard literally trying to disseminate data. Again, using the technologies that actually sit behind it to pull the salient parts, to actually be able to do some data processing and put meaningful information that, again, helps improve the outcomes in their decision making. So they're able to have a firmer data foundation combined with their skills, with their techniques, with their experiences, and with the learnings that they've gone through. On top of this data, it means they're in a better position to make those more informed choices and to be able to do them faster and more efficiently than they've ever done before. We also can look at going further up the supply chain. So again, the more data that we actually have available, again, data privacy preserving, we have to be very careful. It is healthcare, but we can anonymize and use a lot of this data and move it further back up the health chain to some of the therapeutic creators. So the pharma and biotech companies that are actually looking at how can they create better products, therapies, approaches, medical device folks, how are they actually going to make things better? So the providers themselves have the tools to actually make better outcomes. From that point of view, the more of that data we can obviously send back up while they're in the early stages of research, super important. But again, as we go through those kind of clinical trials and assessments, rather than having to have studies where folks have to come in for interviews and stuff all the time, and that's their only data point, again, using things like wearables, using smart devices, using technologies that are available, we're able to collect real-time information, get it back to the guys so we can obviously look at those clinical trials and we can move them forwards. One, we can move them forward at a fast rate or not, so we saw that within the vaccines. But what we're also able to do is we're able to be more accurate and more driven around it. From a NearForm point of view, obviously we work now with a lot of the health and life science companies, and obviously from our experiences working at pace and speed with the governments, we're able to obviously deliver solutions like the contact tracing solution. We're able to now deliver things like vaccine support, so the vaccine credentials, again, to help to get the world back up and open. So again, very much focused on patient-centric, customer-centric, citizen-centric, privacy preserving, but enabling them to do things. And we're doing it in a much faster, more efficient way without ever compromising on quality or security or any of those key issues. Technology in health is really something that's actually going to transform as we drive forwards. COVID has obviously had an impact on all of our lives. Now that we're starting to see the end of that and we're starting to come out of that pandemic as vaccines become more prevalent and we get it out into the global populations, we need to obviously continue that accelerated approach. And coming out of COVID, that resurgence within e-health really needs to drive the future of health.